But I think if I were to boil it all down, I would say that you know yourself and you know when things are not right. And hopefully it's nothing. And hopefully you'll tell your doctor and he or she will just roll their eyes at you. That would be wonderful if they did that. But tell somebody. Tell your medical professional.
Welcome to the Juggling Life Finding Balance podcast. I'm your host, Vivian Cummins, and I am so glad to have you join me today because my guest may literally save your life. Today, I'm talking to Lori Ann Wood. Her story began in a doctor's office with what she thought was nothing but the flu. That appointment led her to become the newest resident of the ICU battling severe heart failure. Lori Ann shouldn't be here. It is only by the love and grace of God that she is able to speak with me today and share her amazing story and her latest book. Her book is entitled Divine Detour. The path you'd never choose can lead to the faith you've always wanted. Ladies, this is an important episode and one you don't want to miss. So please get settled and listen to this discussion with my new friend, Lori Ann. Welcome, Lori Ann. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Vivian, how are you?
I'm doing well. I am so glad that you decided to come on today. I've really enjoyed getting to know you. Been following your socials, and I have a copy of your book here, which we'll get into in a minute. So thank you so much for joining me and sharing your amazing story. I cannot tell you how much I enjoyed reading your stories and learning from you. So I know you are going to be such a blessing to our listeners and those watching today. So before we get started, I would love for you to share a little bit about yourself with our audience. Tell us what you do, your family, all the good things.
Well, I am a very unlikely writer. I started out as a CPA, certified public accountant, and I taught college business classes for 25 years. But during that time, I have my husband and I, who is my high school sweetheart, we have been married a long time. We've raised 3 adult children, and they're great. I love them, but they all live too far away. We live in beautiful Northwest Arkansas, and our little empty nest now just includes a puppy dog and us, but we kind of have a blessing underneath all that in that we have a 3-year-old granddaughter now, and she's expecting a baby brother soon. So that's a whole new phase of life that is unfolding, and we're loving it.
I love that. I didn't know that you and your husband were high school sweethearts. That's fun. Like when you say high school sweethearts, what year did you guys get together? Your junior, sophomore, what year?
Well, I like to say he's a lot older than me, but he was a senior and I was a freshman. So we
Okay.
tiptoed into this relationship and I chased him to graduate school and I got him. But after all of that teaching and accounting I did, I um, had a health situation come up and I turned into a writer and speaker and advocate for heart health for women. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
And that is a lot. And that is one of the reasons why I had asked you to come on today because heart health is an issue. And you wrote a book about your journey, and it's actually a multi-award winning book, actually. And so I'm going to put it on camera here because I would love to start talking about it. Let me see if I can get it up there. Oh, it's such a beautiful cover. Really quick on the cover, tell us about that. Looks like it's a trail or a back road?
Yeah, I love the story of the cover because it encapsulates so much about the book, and the fun story about it is I'm traditionally published, so I didn't get to pick the cover. I
Oh.
looked at it and I was like, "Oh, that's the cover." But, that cover is actually a little trail or a little dirt road through on both sides of it is a wheat field, and I loved it because really depicted what I thought the book was about. But even more than that, I learned later that it's actually based on a piece of artwork out of Ukraine. And I grew up in Kansas, and Kansas, when I was a kid, was the wheat capital of the world. And now Ukraine is a huge wheat producing state or nation. And so I had this sort of connection that I didn't know I had. But the cover actually, the way it ties into the book is the title of the book is Divine Detour. And, if you think about what a detour is, you're going along with your little GPS or your life plan, and you get pushed off onto a little dirt road or a little side road, and it's not the fastest or the prettiest, and it's kind of bumpy and dusty, and it's just not where you want to be. It's not efficient. And along that path, though, what you figure out is it's actually making a way for you when there was no other way. So even though you don't wanna be there, there's that divine element of it where he's making a way for you in that place you don't wanna be. And then the subtitle is, "That path you'd never choose can lead to the faith you've always wanted." And so that felt so right because my husband and I were actually visiting our hometown where we went to high school together in May, and the book had come out in February, and I had it with me, and the roads where we were raised looked exactly like the cover of that book in ways that only God could do it. I was taking
Right.
pictures with my phone going, "This looks just like that road by our farm." And so many of the stories are based on things that happened to me growing up or raising my kids, and so that connection to where I was raised and that road just felt so right and such a God thing because like I said, I didn't pick it, and my
Yeah.
publisher probably didn't know. So
Oh, but God knew. Isn't that then what a beautiful story in and of itself. Oh, I love that. Oh my gosh. Well, I want to dive into what inspired you to write this book and what it's about. So in it, you start to share your story of a frightening doctor's appointment back in, I think it was 2015. Is that right? Yeah. So you went in with what you thought was the flu, and then you ended up in the ICU. So can you tell us what did you learn from that appointment?
well, I was just not feeling well. Like you said, I thought I had the flu because I I didn't have the energy that I usually had, and I was just a really healthy person going into this. I wasn't on any medication. I hadn't really ever been hospitalized except for childbirth, and I was just rolling along, doing what I did. I thought I ate pretty healthy, took care of myself. I thought I'd get a quick antibiotic or something and be on my way that day. And he took a chest x-ray. And when we're on our way down to get the chest x-ray, my PCP said, if we're lucky, it's pneumonia. And I remember feeling something kind of sink into my throat at that point. And what he found when he took that chest x-ray is that I had an extremely enlarged heart, and he immediately admitted me to cardiac ICU, and when I walked in there, I was carrying a chart from him, and at the top, I looked down and it said heart failure, and I that was the first time I saw those words, and they did some testing in the hospital and found out that my heart was functioning at just 6% that day.
Wow. Wow. Okay, I have questions already. So you went in the flu. I mean, the flu, I don't think about doing a chest x-ray with the flu. So what prompted that? Were you having breathing problems or
I I think back about that quite a bit. This doctor was very intuitive. He was like one of those older doctors that he delivered my babies and he just did everything. But they always listen to your chest with a stethoscope when you go into the doctor. It doesn't matter what you go in for. And he did that, and he must have heard something that disturbed him at that time, or he must have felt something, and he didn't really say because he didn't wanna scare me at that time, but he just knew at that point that there was something bigger to what he was listening to because he did no more than listen to my heart with a stethoscope.
Oh my goodness gracious. Okay. So, what before I get to my next question that we were going to talk about. So what happened there? Okay, you get that chest x-ray back, you're 6%. Then what?
So I spent 2 weeks in cardiac ICU, and I was hooked up to all sorts of machines. They wouldn't let me take a shower because they were afraid I would, I was at high risk of dying suddenly from cardiac arrest because my heart was just beating crazy. It was not functioning right. And the funny thing was I felt okay. I felt the same that I'd felt for years. Um, other than just being extremely tired, which I thought was the flu, I felt okay. But during that time, they worked on medications with me. I had to when they finally let me out of the hospital, and it was a hard time in the hospital because we had doctors coming in and out, surprised that I had walked in on my own. And every time they left my room, though, they were in tears. And I couldn't figure out why because, I was like, I'm sure there's accident victims here or people near death here. I'm I'm alive and you guys are watching me and everything's gonna be okay. But what happened was when they finally sent me home, I they sent me home with a hospice binder, and they were thinking the optimistic doctors were thinking, maybe 5 years, and the more realistic ones were thinking, "You better plan on 6 months." And I just didn't feel that sick, but it was hard because I had to wear an external life vest, which is just this vest you wear under your clothes that has electrodes that shock you if your heart stops. It's kinda like one of those public ones that you see with the paddles, but it's a personal one that you wear yourself in case you need it. And I wore that for 9 months, and I was flown to Cleveland Clinic and became my doctor's most critical patient there for a year and a half. And if you know anything about Cleveland Clinic, you don't wanna be their top patient there because they're the number 1 heart hospital in the nation, and I had the head of transplant is my doctor there, and she didn't know she'd ever see me again, but we came back and started just kinda tiptoeing into this and, learning that it's a chronic progressive disease, we knew that it's chronic, it never goes away. The heart muscle never heals itself. They prop it up with medications and devices and lifestyle changes, but when you have damage, then you just deal with that damage. And so we learned how to do that. I got an internal device that was specially made for heart failure. We made a lot of dietary changes, mostly when it comes to sodium, which of all the healthy things I was doing, I was not watching my sodium. And we just have it's been 9 years, and, um, I've had ups and downs with that, it and at first, I thought my first up spike that I had, I thought I was healed, I thought it was over, but what was happening was I had just this general trajectory of going downward, if you think of a line graph sloping down, but as you're going down, you can have some spikes up, and I was just spiking up every once in a while. Right now, I, just got back from Cleveland Clinic a few weeks ago, and my heart function is now at 20%. So, at one point, it had been up to almost 50, and now it's back down to 20.
Oh my goodness. Wow. So y- you've never had a heart attack or heart failure?
No, I have not, and doctors, that was my first question was, "Well, what happened to me? How did I get this?" Because I had no family history, and I had no risk factors. And like I said, I've always just been healthy. And my doctor in Cleveland said that we might never know what happened to my heart. She suspects that at some point I got a virus. And in 2015, before COVID, ever came about. That was a strange idea to have so much damage from a virus, but that's their best guess. And she said it wouldn't really matter because the damage that was done by the virus, or if it was genetic and it was missed all these years, the damage is done. My arteries and all of that are clear. I don't have any blockages, so it wasn't a heart attack, but they don't really know. And so, some people can get heart failure from, it's called peripartum cardiomyopathy right after you have a baby. You may have heard of people having some heart issues. So
Yeah.
sometimes that causes it. Even extreme stress, like broken heart syndrome after you lose someone, that can cause heart failure. I can't pin it back to anything that particularly happened to me in my lifetime, so I'm not sure, but I'm just grateful that we caught it when we did, but, I can look back now and see that there were some signs I probably should have noticed.
Yes, and I would love to talk to you about that. Did I read or am I making this up? Your husband went with you when you went to the doctor because you thought you had the flu, right? So did he make you go to the doctor, or what prompted you to go to the doctor? I mean, because we've all had the flu and stuff, and I don't typically go to the doctor. So what prompted you to go this time?
Well, that was me being stubborn, and that's part of those, heart failure warning signs that I missed, is that was Thanksgiving week, and I had
Oh,
kids at home, and I had kids
yeah.
coming back from college, and I had stuff to do, right? And I did not wanna go to the doctor, but I just kept getting worse that week. I went to convenient care, I think Sunday and Wednesday of Thanksgiving week, and I just kept getting worse and worse, and I spent Thanksgiving Day in bed, which it was all I could do to stay in bed because I could hear people laughing and dishes, and the kids were home, and I couldn't join them. And then the next day was Black Friday, and that's when my husband got up early and started calling our PCP, and he insisted that I be seen that very morning by that doctor, and he wasn't taking no for an answer. And I know that I'm alive today because he did that, because my doctor later told me when I was getting ready for that appointment, I was so out of breath and so out of energy that I was struggling to put my socks on. I just about could not pull my socks up. And my doctor said, "At that point, you were about to die. That's the low point." And so he took me in there and insisted that someone see me because it was Friday, and then it was the weekend, and I would not have made it through that weekend.
Thank God for your husband's, intuition, I guess, in that sense. So
Yes.
you said there were some signs looking back. There's some signs, and these are the things that I think are so important for us to learn from you because, women in particular, we all have heard the statistics and we've heard that that's the number one, killer of women is heart disease, but I don't know that we believe it. You know what I mean? And so this is where we rely on people such as yourself to tell us, no, here's the things you need to be looking for. This is a condition. So I'd love for you to share what are some of those things that you missed, and what are some of those things that we need to be looking out for?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm like you. When I first heard that, when I first heard heart anything after my name on my medical chart, I couldn't believe it, because if I think had made a list of everything I was worried about ever happening in my lifetime, the things I was afraid of, I would have had car accidents and cancer and so many things at the top of the list, but heart disease of any kind wouldn't have even been on the list. I just we didn't have it in our family, and I thought I was avoiding it. But in reality now, I can look back and see, and again, my husband had an in, and I should have listened to him earlier because he urged me to get this checked out many years before I did, because and here's part of where I went wrong. My husband runs marathons, and my kids were in high school sports. So I knew that I was the one that was out of shape. And I kept telling myself, I'm going to get my act together. I'm going to get in better shape. I'm going to be more like them. And then life happened and I didn't. And I became sort of embarrassed about it. And I wasn't like overweight to speak of. I just was out of shape. I just wasn't where I wanted to be. And so I ignored him and I would say, "You don't know," we'd be on vacation and we would be going up a hill or a slight incline, and I couldn't keep up with him. I just felt like someone punched me in the chest. I couldn't get enough air, and my husband was like, "You really need to get this checked out." And I said, "You don't know what it's like to be a normal person because you
Yeah,
run
I'm out of
so
shape,
much."
that's all.
Yeah. Ah, it's middle age
Oh,
kicking in. But,
yes.
all of my signs sort of, I guess you'd say, centered around this idea of being out of shape, this inability to exercise, shortness of breath. I don't even think I knew what that was at the time, but I just thought it was all about letting myself go. I had fatigue. But one of the funny ones that I had, after I learned all these different warning signs, I was telling my children because we've done genetic testing to make sure it's not genetic, but I wanted them to know what the symptoms were, even if it wasn't genetic, so they could maybe get a better prognosis than I'm getting. But I remember going through the list with them and saying, "These are the symptoms I have, and there's another symptom that I didn't have, but I want you to know about it, and that's a constant dry cough." And my youngest daughter stopped me in the middle of what I was saying. And she said, "Mom, you've always had a constant dry cough. When we would lose you in Walmart, that's how we'd find you. We just wait for you to cough." But I had no idea. And the ones that I did know about, I sort of explained away. I mean, they masquerade as so many things, as, menopause, being older, out of shape, so many things. And so I think if I was gonna tell anyone, and I really sympathize with people that have several different things, they may have diabetes and heart disease and all different things stacked together, that it just becomes kinda overwhelming, and I think we get so much information, depending on if it's Heart Month or Diabetes Month or Cancer Awareness, and we feel like we have to be in the know of all these signs and symptoms or what will happen to me? But I think if I were to boil it all down, I would say that you know yourself and you know when things are not right. And hopefully it's nothing. And hopefully you'll tell your doctor and he or she will just roll their eyes at you. That would be wonderful if they did that. But tell somebody. Tell your medical professional whether that, we have so many ways to communicate with our doctor now that we didn't used to have. We can send a note and it can be electronically placed on our chart just like that.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
that once that's on there, it's on someone's radar. And when they go back through and look, it might spark someone to think, "Oh yeah, she was experiencing shortness of breath back in 2025. So we might need to do some more testing." So rather than try to really memorize everything, I think just being aware of that, listening to the people that love you. My my
Yeah.
husband was telling me a
Yeah.
long time ago to get it checked out. I didn't listen.
Yeah.
Um, but just know that everything, I thought mine was pulmonary mostly. I thought it was being out of shape, but I considered it all just a breathing issue. But our bodies are so connected. I had no idea that breathing had so much to do with your heart function. So just be on top of it, and share, I think is the main thing. Listen to the people that are with you all the time that say something's changed, something's different, and then get it on some chart so there can be some medical eyes on it.
That's great advice. So I have to ask, this is no judgment, but did you go to annual appointments, like physical appointments or anything, and it just wasn't caught, or were you not going to physical appointments?
That it's funny you asked that because the doctor that found it, that listened to my heart with a stethoscope and said, "If we're lucky, it's pneumonia," he felt so bad because I saw him every year, and he was like, "I can't believe I missed it." But the truth of the matter is, I wasn't telling him everything. He would ask me about exercising, and I'd be like, in my mind, I'm going, "I'm gonna start tomorrow. Check, I'm exercising." I wasn't being completely honest. I wasn't sharing. And when a doctor comes in and they have that short time period that they're in your room before they move to the next patient, you wanna just hit the major items. You wanna just make sure that you're hitting the things that are life and death, right? So those things that you don't think are important maybe never come up. Maybe you don't tell him you have a constant dry cough because, constant dry cough, he's not worried about that. So that's where that make sure someone knows, make sure when you're doing your pre-check-in that you describe all of that, or make sure when you meet with the nurse before the doctor comes in that they're typing that in, or you go in to your own chart that you can access online at most places now and just bring that up so that it's on your chart. But yeah, I was going, I just wasn't sharing completely.
It's funny that we're having this conversation because of 2 things. So, my husband's retired Air Force, and once he retired from the Air Force, he was no longer mandated to go get a physical, and so I started mandating it. And so, since he's been retired, I make sure I have to make the appointment because if I rely on him, he'll never go. And he's just of that mindset, "I'm not sick, I don't feel bad, why are you trying to make me sick?" I'm like, "I'm not trying to make you sick, I'm trying to keep you alive," right? And so it's time for our annual appointments. And so, of course, I go online and I schedule it. And there's a box there that says, "What would you like to talk about today?" And so I went in there, so, this is my annual physical. And then I started listing a few things that, I mean, I don't think he's sick or anything, but there's changes that I've seen in a couple areas, like you just said. And I don't think it's anything bad, but this is the time to do it. And so this morning on social media, there was a funny little video that came through Instagram where the husband and wife are in the car and she's going with him to his VA appointment. And he's like, "I don't know why you're here." And she's like, "Because I'm the spouse," and it was just so cute. So I made my husband listen to it and I said, "This is just the way it is. We love you. We love our spouses. We want to make sure that when they go to the doctor, they tell them everything, and it's likely nothing, but in your case, it was something." And so it's just funny. I think that that came up today because I literally filled it in for him, and he's like, "Oh, babe." I'm like, "Yeah, just deal with it."
No. I think I have this weird thing, like, I don't want the doctor to think that I'm some sort of hypochondriac or complainer or
Yeah.
something. I had this idea that they're like, "Oh, here comes that complaint."
Here
They're
she
not doing
comes. Here
that.
she comes.
Now
Mhm.
they're saying, "Here's that lady that should have come in 10 years earlier. Here she goes."
She's
So,
the miracle lady. You're a miracle.
well, there is an element of that as well, yes.
Yes, there is. Okay, so you did say though that once the damage is done, it's done, but you went from 6 to 20%, which I know that's still not ideal, but it's better. So what is the prognosis after being diagnosed with end stage heart failure?
Heart failure is a weird diagnosis and it's very inexact because it can come from so many different places and people react to it in so many different ways. But um, one of the markers that they use is like, are you in transplant range? Because ultimately, they can't fix your heart, and medication can do quite a bit about getting you down the road. But ultimately, you have to live with the heart you have or you get a new one. And there's such a shortage of hearts that in order to get one, you have to be really, really sick. And my numbers fall within the range to be listed for transplant. But I just function so well on my 20% that they will not list me, which I'm not chomping at the bit to do to do that anyway, but, um, they they won't list me, and she told me just recently, and I had it's kind of a an awakening, is that because there's such a shortage of hearts, that in order to really be at the top of the list and be ready to get one, I'll probably be on oxygen and not able to move around on my own.
Yeah.
And so, it's a progressive disease. So you don't know how flat that curve is gonna be. You can flatten out for a while and do just great. And right now we're sort of in that flat area where I'm doing pretty good at 20%. I have really short days where, I can get things done, and then, I'm kinda wiped out after that because my heart is just working so hard to do what it needs to do. But that's where we're at, and, God is taking care of us. I just survived so much longer than they thought I would, and I just am grateful because at the time that I was diagnosed, none of my kids were married. I didn't have any grandkids. I was hoping at that point to just get to see my children graduate from high school, and they've all graduated from college, and I have a grandchild now, and I've got this book out, and so, God's been so good to me and has, uh, through this detour, this little road I didn't wanna be on, I've gotten closer to him than I would have been if I'd been on my own, using my own GPS.
Oh, I love that. Oh, what a blessing. What a blessing. So in your book, there's a chapter that really kind of spoke to me. And I thought it was really powerful. And it was you wrote about learning to lament. And I don't know that I've ever looked at grieving and pain in that lens, and so and it's very biblical to lament, by the way. And so for those who are listening and watching and may not understand the deep meaning of what lamenting is, could you please explain that, and how did you process your emotions as you were going through all of this, the shock and anger and all of that?
Mm, yeah, lament was something like you. I had not had that much experience with because when I was growing up, I sort of did my faith the way I did my parents, and my mom would always say, "If you don't have something nice to say, then don't say anything at all." So I thought, that's praying too. I'm only gonna pray good things and happy things. And what I discovered is that, the Bible's full of lament. 40% of the Psalms are lament. And they're in Ecclesiastes and Job, and even Jesus on the cross quoted a lament. So lament is something in scripture that represented personal pain, but also shared suffering when you had a community that was suffering. And the difference, I think, between when we say lament and when we say complaint is that a lament is appealing to God based on his character. And we see that with David in the Psalms so much. He knows God's character and he appealed to God based on his character. But when we're complaining, what we're doing then is we're assuming the worst about God's character. And, think about the Israelites wandering in the wilderness. They were assuming the worst about God's character instead of appealing to him based on his character. So there's a slight difference in the way we approach God with a lament, but it's still not easy because it kind of feels like you got feet in both worlds because you're believing, but you're questioning, and you're trusting, but you're wondering, and it feels like I need to make up my mind almost. But what it actually does is a lament allows you to sift the truth out of your hard feelings. You can be passionate with this expression and feel it deeply. And when you do that, you eventually come down to the truth about God's character and his care. And I think one of the main things I learned about it is that, lament is unique to believers because we have this uh, confusion that's bound to this trust. That we have a petition, but we have this allegiance. And if you're not a believer, you're just mad about it. But we have this knowing that, "Oh, I know God's been there before, and I know he loves me, and I know he's powerful, but this in my life."
Yeah.
And so that
Yeah.
tension is that lament, and that's unique to believers, and it's also, I think, a big privilege that God models that in Scripture and encourages that, because for me, that allowed me to bridge my hard reality with what I knew about God. I had to somehow get from, "This is happening," to, "But I know this is true about God," and the way I got there was by that lament.
I think that is so freeing for somebody today. I mean, I that's how I felt when I was reading that, and I was actually, like, bawling through that portion of your book because, there was a time 3, 4 years, oh gosh, it's been about 4 years ago now where I was dealing with cancer, and I was going through this whole thing where God was getting me through it, but there was that, "Why am I doing," "Why are you doing this? Why are you allowing this?" I was angry, I was scared, and I was and then I felt guilty with my prayer life because my prayer life was lamenting, but I didn't understand at the time that that's really what I was doing. And then when I read that in your book, I thought, "Oh, that's what I was doing, that deep, grief, trusting, and you're just on the fence, but God understands that, and he just embraces you during that time." And so I just found that to be really, really powerful. That was one of the things that really stuck out to me in your book.
Yes, and something that you said there was so you were saying that it really, for me, ended that silent treatment because when I couldn't reconcile what was going on with God, I just I just wanted to say, "Well, forget it then." But that lamenting is your tether to hang on to God in those times when you don't have the words to be happy. You don't have the songs to sing of joy in your heart. It ends that silent treatment, and it keeps you tethered to him, and
Yeah.
I think that's what it was always designed to do.
Yeah. Gosh, that's really good, that silent treatment. That's exactly what that was. Because I remember having, those prayers where I'm just angry and all that, and then I would go a day or 2 and I'm not talking to you. I mean, just it was just yeah, it's just so, it was a confusing time, but also too, I must say, one of the best times of my life, that I've never been closer to God, so and I'm wondering, at what part of this journey for you did you feel called to write this book?
It was one of those things where I never set out to write the book, and I I try to trace it back to the time where I was like, "Okay, this is gonna be a book." What happened was when I was in ICU, a friend of mine dropped off this little notebook to me, and it was just a blank little spiral notebook, and I think she meant for me to write down, like, doctor's instructions or maybe things for the kids at home or things like that, and what it became was, as the nurses would come in the middle of the night and I would be woken up, couldn't go back to sleep, I had all these things running through my head, and I just started to write them down. Why? Where are you? What's going on? I don't understand. And in my mind, I thought, "I'm gonna get all this out, and then when my life comes back together, I'm gonna burn this little book, and no one
Oh,
will know."
right.
And, well, here we are, and
Here we
so
are.
and I still have the notebook. But what happened was, people were wanting to know about my health, and I had not been on any kind of social media before, and I just started to keep a blog about what was going on with my health because it was easier than calling everybody or texting everybody. And then nothing happened for a year and a half. I literally had no updates for a year and a half. I was alive. That was my update.
Right, that's it.
So, what I did was I started to sort of tiptoe on that blog into these faith questions, and I didn't really know how that would land, but I started to tiptoe into it. And I started getting some really good feedback from people that said, I don't have heart failure and I'm not on any kind of health detour, but they might be experiencing divorce or loss of a child or bankruptcy, loss of some other kind of dream. And they said, "I get what you're talking about. I feel what you're feeling." And so I started writing for magazines and other publications, and eventually this book began to take shape. And I didn't know how it was gonna be because in my mind, a book was just a long piece of work that started at the beginning and went to the end, and I didn't know how to write that, didn't know how anyone ever did that. And when I was suffering and when I was and still I have limited energy, I was writing in little short spurts. I was writing, you know, 1,000 words at a time. Those were my blogs, those were my articles, those were my thoughts because when someone's processing a lot of pain, their attention span is very shortened, and mine was short. And what I realized is that the people that were reading it, their attention span was short because they were processing pain. And that's when I knew that rather than my book being this long project from beginning to end, was going to be this collection of shorter pieces that people could start anywhere and come back to and reread or skip over and find one that was appropriate. And so these essays began to come together in a way that I it was just one day they started to come together and I knew it was beyond me. It wasn't something that was coming out of my brain. So that was a real encouragement for me to see those little pieces of thoughts that I had come into this work that could be a book.
Wow, I love that. Your detour, as you call it, it's opened up so many doors, not just to this book, but so many other things. If you would share with us the other platforms that God's opened to you.
Yes. One of the things that I did early on when I was at the Cleveland Clinic, and we calculated recently, and I think we've been there 30 or 40 times at this point. But one of the early times when I was there, I heard about this organization called Women Heart. And it is a patient centered national organization that comes alongside women who are um, currently diagnosed with or at risk of heart disease. And we do things like advocate for law changes and educate. But one of the things I love the most about them is that they are a patient centered organization. And so they match someone who has just been diagnosed with someone who's lived with that diagnosis for several years. And you have an opportunity to talk to that person. And if you live in the same area, to even meet with them. So they're very high on that patient to patient contact because we all know when when something's going on, we want to know and talk to somebody who's done that,
Who's been
been
there,
there.
right?
Yes. So I love that. And I'm a community educator for them. I love that role. And I've also been speaking. I've had opportunity to speak for the American Heart Association at their Go Red for Women luncheon just last spring. And I've spoken at the Pepperdine lectureships in Malibu, several retreats and conferences. And I love the book clubs. I love the little groups where I could go or Zoom in, and those are just so precious. And so, through technology and being able to meet with someone online, or just the ability to connect with people in person in speaking events has just been such a blessing. One of the maybe one of my favorite ones is I had a friend who I met online who had been a reader of my blog, and she said, "I want to use your book to teach a class to incarcerated women in the prison where I am a pastor." And so that was maybe one of my favorite things I've ever heard, that that would apply to someone who had been on such a big detour, and got to hear some of the comments from the women there.
Oh, it is so beautiful to see how God is using you and this experience and all the wonderful things that you're doing. Thank you so much for taking time to talk to me today and to educate us on heart health. And how can our audience get in contact with you? How can they get your book?
Yes. So I'm Lorianne Wood on Instagram and Facebook, and I that's also the name of my website is loriannewood.com. And there's a book tab at the top, and if you want to go to that book tab, there's a book trailer, and there's also a link where you can read the first chapter free just to check it out, see if that's something that feels right for you or the person you're thinking of. And then it's also available several places, and there's links on that page, but it's on Amazon. It's also available from my publisher, Cross River Media. And if anyone, we talked a lot about a couple of things today. We talked about silence and how that can impact our relationship with God. And I have something I'd like to share with anyone who's feeling that right now. And that's called 5 Prayers and Promises When You Can't Talk to God. And that's at loriannewood.com/hope. And the other thing is those heart failure warning signs that I missed. I go into a little bit more about what I thought they were and what they actually were. And there's a graphic you can download at loriannewood.com/heart.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We will make sure that all of that is in the show notes. So, listeners, those of you who are watching, please make sure to go to her website, check all these things out. And for those of you who can see this, I'm going to put this back on the screen. This is a copy of what her book looks like. So, please go get it. You will be blessed. I guarantee it. Lorianne, thank you so much for taking time to speak with us today.
Thanks, Vivian. This was my pleasure.
Thank you for joining me today for another episode of the Juggling Life Finding Balance podcast. I would love to hear how this episode has inspired you. Please leave us a comment and be sure to subscribe wherever you are listening or watching so that we can continue to reach more people. And if you haven't grabbed your free Restoring Balance study guide yet, you still have time. Just hop on over to my website, viviancummins.com, and grab yours today. Until next time, be blessed and stay balanced.